In part 1 of this series, I showed you how to become a Windows Insider and download the ISO image you'll need to install Windows 11 in VirtualBox. Hi there, Albitastic here and welcome. Once you have the ISO file, then it's time to bring up VirtualBox and create a new virtual computer running Windows 11. To do that, I clicked on New and called the new computer Windows 11. I then set the operating system to Windows 10 because VirtualBox doesn't have a setup for Windows 11 at the moment. Then I clicked on Next and set the memory size to 4 gig. The next section set the parameters for the virtual hard disk. For Windows 10, the recommended size is 50 gig. When I clicked on Create, the next section was the hard disk file type. I left it as it was and clicked Next. The next page asked about storage. The two choices are dynamically located or fixed disk. I usually leave it at the default to create a dynamic disk, so I just click Next and move to the final page, which let me set both the name and location of the new virtual disk and the size. I left them the same, which meant the virtual hard disk would be 50 gig. With that completed, I click Create to create my new Windows 11 virtual PC. One thing to note is that although I call it Windows 11, VirtualBox says Windows 10. As already explained, this is because VirtualBox has no settings as yet for Windows 11. The next thing was to update the settings to give me the best chance of success. Don't forget, this is experimental, because in theory it shouldn't have worked because of the restrictions Microsoft placed upon Windows 11, including only being able to install it on computers with the EFI interface and running both Secure Boot and TPM2, none of which exist here. Once I click on Settings, I leave the first page as it is and click on System to get this page. Here I alter several default settings starting with the boot order. I disable floppy, which I then move to the bottom of the boot order, and then change USB tablet to PS2 mouse, which is what I use. Next I enable EFI because Windows 11 is supposed to need the EFI interface. When that's done, I click the processor tab at the top and set the processor count to 2, which may give a faster startup, etc. I leave everything else as it is. In the display section, I leave the graphics controller at the default SVGA setting and the video memory at 128 MB. Then I go to the storage section, which is most important because here I'm going to install the Windows 11 ISO image I've downloaded. I set the 50 GB virtual hard drive to solid state drive, since VirtualBox is running on an SSD. As you can see, the virtual optical drive is showing empty because I haven't yet installed the Windows 11 ISO image, so I click on the small optical drive image, which brings up this dialog box where I choose a disk file, in this case the Windows 11 ISO image. Once I click on that, it's installed in the virtual optical drive in the same way as if I put a DVD into a real DVD rewriter on a real machine. I leave the audio section as it is, but at the network section I disable the network adapter because I don't want any interruptions as I install Windows 11. Once done, I leave the serial port, the USB controller, and the shared folders at their default settings. The last thing I do is to disable the mini toolbar of the user interface. This is just a personal preference and nothing to do with the installation. Once everything is done, I click OK at the bottom, which brings me back to the VirtualBox interface. Here you can see that the optical drive now contains the Windows 11 ISO image, and we're ready to start the install.
Hello friends, if you enjoyed our video, can I ask you to give it a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. We would love to have you as a regular viewer. Thank you, and have a lovely day.